Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to talk a little bit about video games, specifically JRPGs. I know, such a surprise for me to be talking about JRPGs. It's just something that was kind of floating in my back of my mind recently, and I think it's kind of interesting. It's, in particular, I don't know how you would properly categorize this, because I don't even know how the hell I'm going to title this video, but basically it's that thing in video games, in particular JRPGs. You see it a lot more in, like, definitely older JRPGs, but the whole thing of, like, when you have a party, your party is never, they're always with you, but you never see them. You get, oh, here's this one character on the screen, and like it's like, oh, you basically have to imagine that the rest of your party is constantly running with them. You're just not able to see them. Obviously, it's like an aspect that's obviously heavily prevalent in most JRPGs. You'll have like, either it'll be a JRPG where it's like, no matter who's in your party, always will have the main protagonist be the person out on the field, whether it's in dungeons or towns or whatever the case may be, whether it be, you know, your Personas, your Final Fantasies, even using a great example most recently, because I'm talking about it all the time, the Trails of Cold Steel type of situation. But even amongst those situations, those are kind of like, there are variations to that, because that's not always 100% the case in certain regards. Using like Final Fantasy, for example, like to break it down, like, you know, some of the examples I'm meaning is like, you take something like, I think this kind of applies to a lot of earlier Final Fantasies, the whole thing of like, oh, like you'll be in a cutscene and like your other party members will walk out of, like, say like you're controlling Cloud, it'll be a cutscene where Cloud walks and then like Tifa and Barrett walk outside of his body, and it's like, oh, we're about to go walk, or we're about to go explore this place, oh, they'll go back inside your body, and then you proceed playing. Like, that's such a very like old school thing, because I think like even, I think it carried over from like 8-bits and stuff like that, because I think a lot of 8-bit stuff does that. I could be, you know, wrong about that, but I think that kind of applies in that case. Whatever the case may be, that's kind of like a very old school thing when it comes to Final Fantasy, like, you know, 7. But then you take other examples that kind of fall in that same vein. I feel like 9 might have been, no, because 9 wasn't like that. Like, usually if it's you just go to a cutscene where you're like, your people, like, it'll fade to black, and then there'll be a scene where like you and your character, like, you and the other characters will be walking side by side. What I mean is like 8, for example, kind of, I think, broke the mold in that, because like basically like whoever's in your party, whether it's like Zell or Selphie, you know, or Squall, like Squall would be leading, but like Selphie and Zell would be right behind him. So granted, it wouldn't be like that with your entire party, but whoever was in your main battle party, you know. So obviously 9 brought it back to the whole thing of like, only person you saw walking on the field was Tidus. But obviously cutscenes will show like, oh, like everyone was walking with you the entire time, you just didn't get to see it. 13 kind of does the whole 8 thing, where it's like, oh, the 2 people in your party are running behind you. Granted, you have 6 people in your party in total. The other 3 characters are there, you just don't get to see them, type of thing. You know, and I just, the reason why I'm going on this whole tangent about this, I think it's such a fascinating thing, because it isn't just like the whole like, oh, your main character being on the field thing, like only that being the only character you see. That varies from game to game, and it also depends, because it's not just like an old school thing, because even using Trails of Cold Steel, for example, that is like what you see all the time, because like when you're in town or when you're in a dungeon or whatever character you're controlling, more often than not when you're in town, you're basically controlling Rain, but whoever's in your party, where it's, you know, your Laura, your Fizz, your Amakius, your Eustace, whatever the case may be, they're kind of like the main person you'll see running in the field, even though you won't see the other characters with them. There's that whole thing. But even kind of circling back to the Final Fantasy thing, even that's kind of changed, because obviously look at 12, for example. 12 kind of has that thing like 8, like 13 has as well, like I said, and 8, where it's like your party, 2 of your party members, your attack party, are following who, you know, whatever main character you're controlling at the time, right? But that in 12 only applies in dungeons. The moment you're on, or, you know, the world, when you're going in between places, like battle areas, it's like that. But when you're in towns and stuff like that, you're only controlling one character. I think, you know, regardless who's in your party, it's always Vaughn, I think. Because another example would be like 15. 15 is a situation where you always see all 4 characters. You always see Noctis, Gladio, Prompto, and Ignis all the time, regardless of you're in town or whether you're in a battlefield or a dungeon or whatever, because obviously the world kind of blends together, because like combat is not transitional like it is in some JRPGs. It's just straight up like, oh, this is where we are, you're fighting the enemies that popped up here, so on and so forth, right? And even, you know, because even using that as an example of like, even when you get extra characters like Iris, when she's kicking it with you, like if you point, she kicks it with you in the game, like she's there with you. You actually see her on the field with you. Like when you're in the Regalia, it's like, oh, she's there as well, you know? So I just think that's interesting. But to be fair, FF15 is in a very unique position because you're typically only running around with the boys. You never get any other characters aside from your guest characters. So it's never really a thing of like, you have to like, oh, there's too many characters running around for that to be a thing of like, oh, they're popping up on the field. You know, it's like, it's only 3 other characters, so, and they're always with you, so it makes sense for them to be there, not just be like, oh, you go into battle and they randomly pop out. You know, it's just because the way 15 is designed in that regard. Just the whole thing makes me think, like, is that ever going to be something that will go away? I wouldn't expect it to, just because of the whole party system of like, you will have a whole ton of other characters, so that would mean literally rendering all these other characters at the same. It's like, why would you go through the trouble? But it's like, I'm wondering, will it ever get to the point where you do have a 15 situation where all the characters are present? I doubt. In some cases, if it's a 15 type of situation where you have very few characters, maybe. I think that's probably going to be a more modern thing, because obviously, like, you even take something like, a great example would be like Wild Arms 3. Wild Arms 3, like, you only have 4 protagonists at any time. Because I was about to name them because I can't remember everyone. It's like, is it Virginia, Clive, Jet? I can never remember our home dude's name. Is it Gallo? Is he the 4th one? I don't remember. God, that's been so long. That's an example. You have 4 characters, but you only see 1 character at a time. To be fair, it's like that was an older game, so it's like if it was more modernized, maybe they'd have all 4 out and about at a time. Kind of like, you know, Infinite No Discovery is a game I recently, you know, talked about, you know, in a different video recently. All your characters kind of run around with you in dungeons, kind of like, you know, like I said, you know, like your 8s, your 12s and 13. To be fair, with the 8 situation, I'm remembering now, it's like, right, it's like that all the time in 8, whether your party will always follow the other 2 characters in your attack party, whether it's dungeons or whether you're in a town or whatever. The only exception is when you're on a world map, it will always be, I think, just Squall. I think he's always going to be your worldview character, regardless of tangents and all that. I don't really know what the purpose of this video was. It was just something that was in the back of my mind that I was just like, I think that's kind of an interesting thing that I don't hear too many people ever talk about. Like I said, just kind of the old school way of how that's handled and represented versus how it is handled now. Like I said, it still stays the same, but it made me think of like older games, especially like 7, where it's like you don't see your characters walking into like the main character. It's like, oh, it's time to, you know, it's like, oh, now you're going to walk out of my back. Like I said, that's a very like older JRPG representation of just showing you like, oh, this is your party's with you, whether you really realize it or not. Like that's like a 7 and forward situation. Everything from like 1 to 7, like handled it like that. And obviously it's kind of, like I said, changed and evolved over the course of the years. And, you know, other Final Fantasies and obviously, like I said, other JRPGs have kind of had their way of handling that as well. I just, like I said, in the grand scheme of things, I just think it's interesting. Because even using the Final Fantasy VII, for example, using the remake, they make it so that even in towns or dungeons, your other characters are always running behind you, type of situation. So, you know, even using that, for example, they modify that to be for a more modern age. You know, so, I mean, granted, I haven't played all the way through the remake, so I don't know how that looks. I'm sure it's not going to be like what, you know, I'm sure it's going to be the thing of like, it's only going to be the 3 party members you roll with, you know, because obviously, like, because Final Fantasy VII is kind of built off the back of like, I mean, the remake, it's kind of built off some of the systems of like Kingdom Hearts and FF15, so it makes sense that it has that, because like Kingdom Hearts, you always have like Donald and Goofy rolling with you. Great, like obviously in the older games, it's like if you whatever other party members you had typically would have been like Disney specific world characters, you wouldn't see them unless they were in your parties, because obviously at any point in time it was always going to be Sora and whatever other 2 characters you have in your party, you know. So, but obviously they changed that with 3 because they make it so that Donald and Goofy always stay in your party, and then you always have like whatever Disney specific characters are in your party will just be on screen as well. So that's kind of like a situation of them kind of applying what I was talking about, keeping that 15 thing while also maybe even going a step further. So that's why I feel like depending on the number, they might keep, probably if it gets to the point of like, oh, we got 5 characters, that might be 5 or 6 might be the limit of how far they'll go. Like I said, I'm not really 100% sure where I was going in this video. I'd actually love to know what your thoughts are about my random rambling ons about this whole situation. Just let me know your thoughts. If you could piece together some of my, you know, nonsense. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good